call the Ordinance Committee meeting to order. May we have a roll call?
Councilmember Rouse? Here. Mayor Maria's here for Oscar Gutierrez, and Madam Chair Sin.
Here. Thank you. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'd like to invite staff report on abandoned shopping cart ordinance.
Thank you. Afternoon, members of the Ordinance Committee. Assistant City Attorney John Doimus with me today, as well as Victor Garza from Downtown Parking and Renee Irely, Environmental Services Manager. We're pleased to bring you the proposed ordinance regarding abandoned shopping cart ordinance. The first issue I'd like to talk about is what is the overall policy concern, and it is in terms of to address both health and safety conditions as well as nuisance conditions. You can see by the photographs here, one of the health and safety concerns would be abandoned shopping carts presents a true health and safety impact. You know, for example, strong winds can push shopping carts into the street. It's visual blight that could affect tourism. And so the purpose of this is to already address, which I'll get into later, already address something that is prohibited from state law, which is to remove shopping carts from a business premises and focus the ordinance especially on a preventative plan. And that's what we'll be focusing today on presentation. So the ordinance overview, I'll get into in terms of state law, but the ordinance, first of all, must be consistent with state law. And that means that the state has occupied the field in this regard in terms of prescribing or allowing what cities can do or cannot do. But they limit what city can do in terms of fines, in terms of recovery costs, in terms of even what can be charged or what cannot be charged. But if you want to take an overall view of this ordinance, I would divide it up into three pieces to visualize 3 points. The first point is that the ordinance has a charging section to make it unlawful to remove shopping carts from businesses or to possess it after it's been removed. That we already have state law in regards to that. I have seen citations issued from the police department citing the business and professions codes add to that. So that's nothing new in terms of being able to charge. What it allows, by having an ordinance, it also allows our city prosecutor also to charge these potential violations. The second part of this ordinance is the retrieval plan, that retailers must submit a plan to prevent this from occurring. That's where a lot of our resources and attention are going to have preventative measures in place and put the onus on retailers for making sure that the shopping carts aren't leaving their business premises. And the third part of this ordinance is the abatement of it, how we would go about a city staff to collect abandoned shopping carts once we give notice, or collect them if they're impeding emergency services or there's no identification of whose cart it is. As I mentioned, state law, the Business Professions Code sections there above that I have in the PowerPoint, that's known as the California Shopping and Laundry Cart Law. There are certain requirements already mandated in the code in terms of requiring signs to be affixed to a shopping cart, making it a state misdemeanor if it's removed or someone possesses it after you're still possessing it off business premises. Of course, there's exceptions to that, consent given by an owner. It also allows cities to impound, store, and collect, and it prescribes a certain amount of fees and fine. For impound, it allows cities to impound immediately in cases of emergencies, in cases where there's no identifying factor, and it allows the cities to give 24-hour notice if there is identifying whose cart it is, and if they're not collected within a 72-hour period, to collect the shopping carts. The fines the collection of the fees are based on what our cost is to collect it, so it's cost recovery. The fines are also prescribed by state law. It's no more than $50 after a third occurrence within 6 months after a 24-hour notice is given to a shopping cart owner.
Mr. Doimus?
Yes.
You said that kind of fast. Can you repeat it again?
The last part?
The fines?
The fine is $50 per abandoned shopping cart after a third occurrence within a 6-month period, and of course after 24-hour notice is given to the shopping cart owner. So we have to give notice that it hasn't been abated, it's the third occurrence in that 6-month period, and no more than $50. And that's state law, so we can't go above that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did gather some statistics looking into this issue, and as of now, over 150 cities or counties up and down California have shopping cart ordinances, and that includes some local cities like Ventura, Carpinteria, Oxnard. In 2012, I did find a study by the California Grocers Association that listed at that time 99 cities that had shopping cart ordinances, and a third requiring a retrieval plan. That number is pretty consistent because out of the 150 cities I did look into that have ordinances, about a third as well had a retrieval plan that requiring businesses to submit a plan to the city that shows what steps they're taking to ensure that shopping carts do not leave the business premises. So the proposed ordinance, as mentioned, it's consistent with state law in terms of making it unlawful, following the prescribed noticing requirements. It requires signage to be posted on each cart, as well as warning that it's illegal, and it requires shopping carts to secure their carts when the businesses are closed. The ordinance permits the city, as I mentioned earlier, to retrieve the carts if there's an emergency or the cart has no identification of whose owner it is. And in all other cases, when we know who the shopping cart owner is and it's not impeding any emergency services, health and safety impact, we would retrieve the cart after three business days. When we give notice to a business cart owner and they have not retrieved it, we are required by state law to hold that cart for 30 days before we can sell or destroy it. And we cannot charge any fees for a cost recovery for obtaining a cart before the 72-hour period, but after the 72-hour period, we can get our fees for the impoundment, our costs. The unique part about this ordinance that I'd like to talk about is the abatement, the submittal of a plan, the merchant requirements. So nothing new in terms of requirement about the carts being identified with the owner information. There is a submittal of a cart containment and retrieval plan, and with that plan, there's notices on the business premises by the entrances or exits that state that illegal removal is illegal of shopping carts. The plan will require what mechanism businesses choose to implement for making sure that carts are not abandoned. That could be a wheel lock system that, for example, that may have a geofence device that as soon as the shopping cart leaves the business premises, the shopping cart's lock. It could be contracting with a shopping cart removal service. It could be training employees or having someone out in the parking lot. It all depends on how they plan on address it, the size of the business, and how many shopping carts we're talking about to see what's appropriate. There are exemptions that we provide from the plan from submitting a yearly requirement. That would be if they do, probably the two most effective ways that have been shown, one being the electronic mechanism that locks it, or contracting with a service that retrieves shopping carts. The cost of reviewing the plan, we will bring before the ordinance, we will bring later time on with staff determining how much it will cost to review the permit plan. And we will also do outreach with businesses in terms of this plan. The anticipated effective date under the ordinance is February 1st, 2020, and then any business opening up thereafter would be required to submit a plan to the city within 30 days. And as I mentioned in the onset of my presentation, the goal of this plan is to, address health and safety concerns, also the focus is not so much the criminalization of abandoned shopping carts, but really putting forth preventative measures. So putting some responsibility on the store owners and the merchants in town and working with them, developing a partnership in terms of ensuring that carts aren't leaving their business. They're very costly to replace, and so it benefits them as well. And as I said, the focus will be on retrieval as opposed to punitive measures. The shopping cart ordinance itself will be enforced by designated city employees, especially for the retrieval, and potentially the city attorney's office if there's a need to prosecute. The failure to submit a shopping cart plan could be will be handled administratively pursuant to administrative fines under Chapter 1.25. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm open to questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Duemas. Councilmember Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Duemas, one of the issues I know talking to PD from time to time is that the identifying tags, oftentimes plastic flaps or whatever, are ripped off by the person who takes the cart, and so now the cart is no longer identifiable, therefore this person can't be in possession of stolen property. So that's now, are you suggesting a different method of tagging these carts so that the grocery stores can keep a positive ID on them, or something that can't be removed? Or is this whatever, is it up to the individual grocer or individual merchant?
Councilmember Rouse, it would be up to the individual grocer. They may want to work with us in terms of identifying certain colors, but as I said in the beginning, it is already illegal anyway. I've seen citations issued to people in violations of business and profession code, and the goal is not to criminally cite the shopping cart businesses too for when a cart is stolen from their property. It's the focus of this ordinance. There's state law that already deals with it, and our ordinance will also give a charging section for someone having possessing of an abandoned shopping cart off business premises. But the ordinance here is for businesses to develop a plan to address this issue in terms of and what would be the most convenient plan for them. And like I said, the ordinance does provide exemptions for probably two of the more costly yet effective plans, and that would be the wheel lock system and the having a security from going around, making sure either the carts aren't being taken off or retrieving them very quickly. Because if they are taken off, the goal is that they're repossessed by the business as soon as possible.
Well, that was the concern of some of the grocers I talked to, was that we're going to require those plans, but those are an option that are obviously what they can choose to do. But going back to, if a person possesses a cart which is clearly identified, then it is stolen property and can be cited as such. If the person possesses a cart that has no identifying features, then we're out of luck, right, in terms of enforcement?
No, we're not. So if a person possesses a cart with no identifying features, or it's abandoned out in the public, we can impound that immediately. The idea is then if it'd be in storage within 30 days, and then at that point we would dispose of the shopping cart. So one of the hopes that I have in terms of working with businesses and merchants and working with city staff on this issue is stating that we are going to collect these carts and we're going to impound them and eventually destroy them off. So it would be in your best interest to work with us in terms of developing as many identifying features. So at least we can provide you notice either that it's here or that we have it in possession and please come retrieve it. And so but if it's possessed off business premises and no identifying feature, that's against the law and that can be impounded immediately.
So
Chair Sneddon and Councilmember Rouse, let me distinguish a couple of things. You're correct that for the police to write a citation under the Business and Professions Code, there has to be a sign. One of the reasons we're doing a parallel ordinance is that our ordinance doesn't have the signage requirement on it. So you're right. The existing law that the police are enforcing requires an identifying sign on the cart before a person taking it can be charged with illegal possession of it. Our ordinance doesn't have that same requirement.
So I'm sorry for beating this to death, but so if a person possesses a shopping cart that is not identifiable per any owner, store, logo wearer, it's still, they're in violation of this ordinance if they just possess a shopping cart. Just walking down the street with it.
Madam Mayor, or excuse me, Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Rouse, the crime is to remove the cart from the premises. It's not possession. So under 994-040, page 3 of your ordinance, the charge would be unlawfully removing the cart.
Okay, so if someone possessed a cart that wasn't identified, they wouldn't necessarily be in violation of this ordinance. They would have had to been the act of removing it from a premise.
Correct. And as Mr. Doima said, this ordinance has two halves. It has the half that applies to the person taking the cart, and it has the half, or really 3/4, that creates a management structure for the people who own the carts. So, as Mr. Doima said, we've been very careful not to turn this into criminalizing the people who have the carts. We're more interested in preventing the carts from getting out there in public to begin with. So again, the charge here is unlawfully removing the cart, not simply possessing it.
Well, once again, I appreciate that. Now I think I understand it, but that's talking to law enforcement, their frustration has been the removal of all the IDs from the cart itself. And therefore, we don't have a leg to stand on. If we just see somebody with obviously a $200 shopping cart, hauling their goods around, but we're still not able to do anything with that because we didn't know where they came from. All right, thank you.
Madam Mayor, do you have questions?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. So you're saying that in the case, sorry, now I'm going after this same thing. So someone from the city can impound that shopping cart that doesn't have an identifier on it.
Madam Chair, Madam Mayor, yes, if a shopping cart is abandoned, does not have any identifier on it,
Okay.
we could immediately impound that shopping cart.
Okay, and is there any way for us to go forward with this without fines or criminalization to the merchant? I made a few calls to Mr. Rouse. Bevmo representative said people don't take their carts. It's very rare. Trader Joe's told me people take their carts. And then Mr. Dixon from Tri-County Produce sent us all an email and said that they're worth $200 a piece, and they try really hard not to let them get off of their property. So I'm assuming that there's the businesses out there work hard to make sure that they don't escape. And so I'm worried about fine and any other kind of prosecution, I'm seeing those words here
Sure.
today, being used against a business.
Councilmember, Madam Chair Snyder and Madam Mayor, there are no criminal prosecution for the shopping cart merchants. They would not be prosecuted for any crime. The purpose of this ordinance, and state law would only prescribes, I think the legislative intent is not to be what you say, your concern here is not to be very harsh on businesses. When it says, you after a third offense in a 6-month period, it's a $50 fine, right? So there's a very careful, I recognize the legislature intent in terms of fining them. So there really is no fines. The issue is if a business does not submit a plan in terms of that could be issued administrative fine, but that's after noticing them and saying you need to submit a plan within a certain amount of time, requiring that being on the business to do so. And there wouldn't be a fine in terms of retrieval of the cart. When we retrieve the cart, it's only cost recovery if it's after 72 hours that they've been given notice and they never picked it up. That'd be the only
Well, Mr. Joymus and
punitive
Madam
measure.
Chair, what I heard from the people I talked to is that if they get a phone call that someone's saying, hey, your cart's over here in Oak Park, or so Bevmo fetches it themselves because they have a van, Trader Joe's has a service. So, a contractor that goes and gets it. So I think that if they get called, that they will go and fetch their shopping carts. My question to Ms. Grisanti is here representing the city administrator, is it possible for city employees in general, if they spot one, to call it in? And we have a lot of streets workers and park rangers and the urban forestry workers. I mean, they're out on the street and they spot things, and maybe that they can we have that answer before the end of the hearing, Ms. Grisanti, if it's possible, because I think I'm sort of asking city administration, is there a way to have eyes out there from other city employees? That way, that would help us identify where they are abandoned and retrieve them, Mr. Kalan?
Chair Sneddon, Madam Mayor, yes, that's possible. The point of the ordinance, though, is to create, and by the way, this state law, which largely preempts local regulation, was negotiated by the grocery store owners and the legislature. And it declares that the problem of abandoned shopping carts is a matter of statewide concern. So it's of serious concern to the legislature. They decided there should be a uniform approach across the state, and they negotiated a deal with the grocery store owners.
Okay.
Having said that, what this law does is really create best management practices that, in my experience, the chain grocery stores have no problem at all and are self-interested enough to implement many of these requirements on their own. So if you go to Ralph's, they've got an identifying placard on their cart already. They have a means of cleaning the carts. They make some effort at retaining them. So the intention is neither to criminalize the homeless nor create some onerous structure for businesses. These are what I would call best management practices, and all we're doing now is bringing them to bear in Santa Barbara, along with 150 other cities in California that have done the same thing.
I have a couple of more questions, if I may.
Yes.
So does anyone know the estimated cost for retrieving a cart? You said that
Yeah,
we would charge the,
Cost recovery, correct.
Cost recovery.
Madam Mayor, yes, we would look into that. It probably would be akin, looking at the master fee schedule, as our cost recovery for our electronic scooters. I know it's a little bit larger, so we're developing that would be. So it would just be the cost recovery of staff to pick up the carts and store and impound them. And also to address your previous question, the ordinance does designate, allow the city administrator to designate city employees tasked with this. It gives a mechanism for us to impound if they're abandoned and they're either not identified or emergency services are impacted. And most importantly, though, you were mentioning Trader Joe's, and that's what we want. A lot of stores have some plans, right? And so all we're asking for is to submit those plans so we can see, in terms of what Mr. Kalan says is best practices, to ensure that it's not causing a nuisance in the neighborhood, that these carts aren't being let go and abandoned into the community. So, sorry.
okay. Well, okay.
Chair Sneddon, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to, Mr. Garza may know what the city is paying private vendors to pay. We're paying private vendors at this point to collect carts, aren't we?
Thank you. Chair Sneddon, Renee Irely, Environmental Services Manager. The city does have a contract right now to assist with collection of carts out in the store, and we pay on a per cart basis, and it's right around $3 per cart. And
What was that? How many?
$3 per cart.
$3?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
That's
I
reasonable.
cannot attest to that as actually cost recovery, but I would say that given the volume of carts that this company collects or potentially collects in the community, that averages out over to pay the wages for their drivers.
Well, Madam Chair, cost recovery sounds good. The fines make me a little nervous because we're trying to be business friendly. And then my last question is, when Ms. Irely, maybe you're a good person for this question. Thanks for being at the microphone. We're asking for a plan. Can we develop a form that businesses can fill out asking the information that we want? That was a suggestion that I got from one of the store managers, was, make it easy, give us something to fill out.
So yes, Chair Sneddon, Madam Mayor, that we are already anticipating that. So actually, my team deals with a host of ordinances and working with the businesses in the community. So we would collectively in the city put together a template for the plan so that it is easy as possible for the 34 affected businesses in the community that have carts, as we're aware of, and as well as the exemption form. So it would be a very simple process for any business owner to be able to fill out this forms, give us the information, and then for us to be able to do follow-up on them.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Yes, and then I have a few questions. If a cart has personal belongings in it and a shopkeeper is to retrieve their own cart, what is the protocol for what happens with the personal belongings in the cart?
The person retrieving the cart has a law enforcement situation and needs to contact the police. So there is not any procedure in the Business and Professions Code for self-help for the cart owner to dispose of or otherwise physically confront somebody with the cart with possessions.
So if a merchant has a plan on file that they're going to be retrieving their own carts, and then they're in a situation where that's not advisable, are they in violation of their own plan?
I can address that. Chair Sneddon, no, the plan states that it can't violate any state law or ordinance, and so any plan where they would confront someone obviously would be potentially a violation of law. But you do raise a good point in terms of part of this plan, part of dealing with this is also educating merchants too and their retrieval services to make sure when they're confronted with situations like this that they aren't, basically dispossessing that person, confronting that person. It's best, like Mr. Kallan says, to call law enforcement to deal with that issue in terms of being able to retrieve the cart while at the same time allowing the person to keep their personal possessions.
Do we have any public comment on this item so we can move to questions and discussion? Okay. I have some concerns here with the onus on the merchant who's already been robbed. They've already lost their cart, and now they're responsible for a plan in place to prevent that from happening, which they would want to do anyway, and then responsible for retrieval of a stolen item. Like if my bicycle is stolen, I'm not the one going around trying to find who stole it and retrieving it and doing that. I call the authorities if that's happened, and of course I'm going to do all that I can to prevent that from happening. But should it happen, I just have a little bit of concern with that being on the merchant, particularly smaller merchants. And if there's you mentioned 34 affected businesses in the community, and I suppose I have a question about the sizes of those different businesses.
We could provide an exemption in the code, right? And I would probably ideal would be the amount of carts they would have. So, for example, if a business had 5 or 10, obviously those carts are really valuable to their inventory, and they would notice it was missing. So, any business that has 5 or 10, whatever the Ordinance Committee would direct, would be exempt from submitting a plan. That could obviously, and I can place that in the exemption section.
And what sizes? What are the delineations? Like 5 would be very small, but
Sure.
at what point does it become a large chain where a lost cart is not such a liability?
Believe it or not, I do have previous background in grocery store businesses. Usually when you have a larger 12-aisle type of store, 10-aisle store, you would probably have anywhere from over 25 shopping carts you would see. That's just based on personal experience. There's no, I wasn't able to see an ordinance that has, not saying that's not in existence, but that would have a qualifying factor as to any exemption in terms of number of carts they possess. But
And then, Mr. Kallan, I had a question for you. You said there were 99, or you mentioned 150 local agencies, and then there are 99 that have shopping cart ordinances, but only a third of those 99, so 33, have a retrieval plan requirement. That doesn't sound like that high of a number to me. The 33 out of the 150 out of the municipalities in the state, and I'm concerned about the retrieval plan being onerous, and I agree with that. Having a form might be better, and mainly the educational component, that merchants are educated in what best practices are, rather than fined if they have a shopping cart stolen.
Chair Sneddon, members of the committee, I mistakenly thought that Mr. Garza was responsible for the cart retrieval, but what I wanted to say is that we've relied heavily and would continue to rely on environmental services for being that customer service face with the stores that are regulated. This is not something where there is any reason for us to come down hard on these stores. They share the same interest we share. One way to look at this, the $3 economy isn't working. We need to do something to make these carts more valuable to their owners if we want to get them off the street. So that's another way to think about what this process does.
Thank you. Mr. Klon, if we had a exception for smaller chains, would that also apply to having a plan in place? Or could that also apply to having a plan in place, or would it be required that everyone have a plan in place?
No, Madam Chair Sneddon, the exception would say that you wouldn't have to submit a plan if you had these many carts in operation or that you use. So that wouldn't require a business that had 5, 10, whatever number you direct, that wouldn't require it, because, and it's a good policy issue, because as I said earlier, their carts are more valuable the less they have for their customers. So I can see a correlation with not requiring submittal of a plan.
I'd be in favor of that, of having a tiered approach where larger chains, more carts, less incentive to hold on to them as tightly, would be required to submit a plan, and then also have the retrieval in place. If there's discussion on that. Madam Mayor?
Madam Chair, would that require some research from our staff to come up with a number, 5 or 10? That was one question I didn't ask when I was talking to people. How many carts do you have, actually?
I would be supportive of coming back with that number, either to the Ordinance Committee or when it comes to Council.
Sure. Well, Mr. Rouse had his light on first to make deliberative comments, so I'll wait. Thanks.
Councilmember Rouse?
Yeah, I was just, thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering, is there a hotline, or will be a hotline created? Because part of the effectiveness of a plan like this is going to have public engagement. It's certainly one of the big concerns for the public are abandoned shopping carts. So this is almost as much about messaging as it is the actual getting the carts off the street, as far as I'm concerned. Will there be a hotline, or even a property abandonment hotline, or one of all the above? Or
Thank you, Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Rouse. We do have a recently enacted hotline for the encampments reporting, and that is certainly a number that we could roll issues like shopping carts into that, so that the community is using one number to report these things.
Well, I think the public at large oftentimes is confused about what they can and can't do, and who they should call and why, and so they call. You should just call Victor instead, which usually takes care of everything in my book. But I think the suggestion of actually just going ahead and taking this to the full council rather than kind of come back with ordinances, because there may or may not be nuances, but I think the public messaging and going forth about shopping carts is as important as anything. Certainly the Grocers Association, we dealt with them pretty intensely during the shopping bag issues back in the day. I think they're pretty good at getting their information out to and information back from their member, even the small independents. So, and in a small town like this, a small coastal town, you're going to have small independent merchants as well. So rather than try to parse that, I think we should think about it as a general cultural thing, that we're not going to harbor shopping carts out in the wild, the cage-free shopping carts, as it were. So I would move staff recommendation and move this forward to council.
May I?
Madam Mayor.
So with the understanding that a recommendation for small businesses versus large would be brought back by staff at that time?
Certainly, as an informational thing, I don't know if I want to make that as a policy, but certainly, yeah, we should answer those questions because I'm sure the rest of the council will have those questions as well.
I would second that.
Okay.
Yeah.
To be clear, so that is a motion to move staff recommendation, but without the specific recommendation to have a tiered application for...
That's correct. That'd be coming back with staff information because I don't think we have the information in front of us to really be able to make those classifications in tiers, but staff certainly, and especially environmental services, may be able to go out and get the boots on the ground information most helpful just to make a decent decision.
And that would come forward in the recommendation then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We recommend that we get the information back from staff while forwarding staff recommendation to move this forward to council.
I would prefer that the staff recommendation include a tiered approach and that the number be left to be determined. But that is,
I'm failing to see the difference here, but I mean, you're saying that you wouldn't forward it without a two-tier system?
Yes.
Okay, I'm waiting for the information from staff. This is new news to me. I don't know that the turf. I'd like to have staff go forward and find it for us. So I think rather than tie their hands or tie the hands of the council, I would rather have us go forward with staff recommendation with the idea the staff will come back to us with the proper in-the-field information.
Okay.
If I can chime in. So
Yes.
I'm with you, but I'll vote for the motion because we need to move it forward. And I believe that staff is hearing that 2 of the 3 on the Ordinance Committee today wants them to come back with a number. So that they're taking good notes over there. I see that. And
I just have confusion if that will come back in the recommendation with the staff report.
that's my understanding, yeah.
Chair Sneddon, members of the committee, we would faithfully represent the 2 members of the committee. We're interested in looking at a small store exemption that, in the absence of data, you wanted that information in the report for council.
Thank you. Very good.
Yeah.
I think we are ready for a vote.
Mayor Murillo.
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse.
Aye.
Madam Chair Sneddon.
No.
Okay. Very good.
If we have no further business, with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Roger Rosenberg, backup saxophone. Go back to the 10th piano.